It was Christmas night in Boulder, Colorado in 1996. It was a time to be filled with joy and peace and happy dreams. But for one little 6-year-old girl, it was a night of horror. Fleet and Priscilla White had dinner on Christmas night, and they invited their friends, the Ramsey family, John, Patsy, Burke, and JonBenet. And they all seemed to have a good time that night. And the Ramseys left their house around 9 p.m. Christmas night. Did an intruder with a sick fascination with JonBenet Ramsey enter the Ramsey residence through a grating, into a window well, through a basement window, and wait while the Ramseys were away for them to return and go to bed? Did the intruder check out the layout of the house? Did he enter JonBenet's bedroom? And did he write a 3-page ransom note? Now the Ramseys lived just a little more than a mile away from the White's house. And on their way home, they decided to drop off some presents for their friends. And so first, they stopped at the Walker's house. Stuart and Roxy and their 2 daughters. Then they stopped at the Steins' house. Glenn and Susan and their son Doug, a good friend of Burke Ramsey. And Patsy went up to the door and stayed there for about 10 minutes talking to Susan Stein. Then the Ramseys thought about going to the Fernie's house, but it was 10 miles south, and so they decided not to go, and they returned to their house. After the Ramseys had all gone to bed, the intruder made his move. He went up to the 2nd floor and pushed open JonBenet's door and closed it behind him. And he shocked her with his stun gun and incapacitated her. Then he took her down the stairs and down into the basement and put her on the floor, and had planned to tie her up with his nylon cord. But she regained consciousness and screamed. And then something horrible happened, and he abandoned his plan, and he ran. On December 26 at 5:52 a.m., an urgent 911 call came in.
We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. There's a note left in our daughter's door. I don't know. I just found the note. What? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It says FBTC. Victory. Please.
The ransom note was unusual. It was 2.5 pages long. It had phrases like small foreign faction. It asked for $118,000. It said to bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. It said speaking to anyone about your situation, such as the police, the FBI, will result in your daughter being beheaded. And the last page mentioned John's first name 3 times and told him don't try to grow a brain. And the note closed with victory, exclamation mark, SBTC. The initial police officer on the scene did a quick inspection of the interior of the house and found that there was no obvious signs of a forced entry or of a struggle. The police questioned Patsy Ramsey, and she said about 5:45 a.m. she went into JonBenet's room and found her missing, and then she went down the stairs and found the ransom note and immediately called police. When the police asked Patsy who she thought might have wrote the ransom note, Patsy suggested Linda Hoffman Pugh, their housekeeper. She called the day before and asked to borrow $2,500 because she couldn't pay her rent. The police sent officers out to interview housekeeper Linda Hoffman Pugh and her husband in nearby Fort Lupton. Mr. Ramsey told the police that the house had been locked up the night before and that he checked it in the morning after JonBenet was gone, and it was still locked up. John Ramsey was the president of Axis Graphics. This computer business was located at 1426 Pearl Street in Boulder. This business was very successful. Just 4 days before this crime, John Ramsey appeared in a newspaper article where Axis celebrated $1 billion in sales revenue. $1 billion. Why didn't the kidnappers ask for more money? A measly $1 million or so. All of a sudden, Priscilla and Fleet White showed up, John Fernie, and then Barbara Fernie, and the reverend from the church, who liked wearing fancy bow ties. Detectives on the scene learned from John Ramsey's friends that his oldest daughter from a previous marriage had died in a car accident in January of 1992. Even though the police stated there was no obvious entry into the Ramsey residence, there was a set of windows in the basement that had a broken window pane, and it was the one below the grating above. And indicated in this crime scene photograph, taken later in the day, is a scuff mark on the wall that the police didn't notice. And in the breakfast dining room, there was a glass with a tea bag inside of it and a bowl with fresh pineapple sitting on the table. And a mag flashlight was left on the kitchen countertop. Crime scene investigators came to the Ramsey residence. One conducted fingerprint dusting, but couldn't find any unknown fingerprints. And another photographed the house, but he couldn't find anything. Several telephone calls came in between that 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. time period, yet no one called to collect that $118,000 ransom for the safe return of JonBenet Ramsey. Later in the morning, the mail came in the slot in the front of the house. And John Ramsey collected the mail and looked at the mail and read his mail. Later, he said he was looking for something from the ransomer. Detective Arndt spoke to John Ramsey. She suggested to John that he and Fleet White check the house from top to bottom to see if anything belonging to JonBenet had been taken or had been left behind. After she spoke to John, he immediately went to the basement door. The time was approximately 1 p.m. John Fernie stayed upstairs while John Ramsey led Fleet White down to the basement. In Burke's train room, they looked at the broken window. Ramsey told White that some months ago he found himself locked out of the house and had broken the window, unlatched it, and climbed through. Before they left the train room, they searched 2 closets near the entrance to the room. Then Ramsey, with White a few paces behind him, turned right into the boiler room. At the rear was a door leading to what the family called the wine cellar, a windowless room with brick walls. Ramsey pulled the door open towards himself, stood at the threshold, and, peering to the left into the darkness, saw a white blanket on the floor just as he reached for the switch on the wall to his right and turned on the light. Then he saw 2 little hands sticking out from under the blanket. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" John Ramsey cried. JonBenet was lying on the floor, partly wrapped in a blanket. Her hands were extended over her head and appeared to be tied together. There was tape covering her mouth. With a distance of about 12 feet, Fleet White saw Ramsey enter the wine cellar and turn out of sight to his left. As Ramsey cried out a second time, Fleet followed him into the room. By now, Ramsey had ripped the tape off his daughter's mouth and was untying the cord around one of her wrists. White kneeled beside Ramsey and touched one of JonBenet's feet. The child was dead cold. A few moments later, Ramsey picked up his daughter. Rigor mortis had set in and her body was rigid. Holding her by the waist like a plank of wood, he raced down the short hallway and up the basement stairs, yelling that JonBenet had been found. White had preceded Ramsey, shouting for an ambulance. It was 1:05 p.m. As Ramsey emerged from the stairwell carrying his daughter, he turned and met Detective Arndt. JonBenet's hands were still extended above her head. A string hung from her right arm. Arndt ordered Fleet White to guard the door to the basement and not let anyone in. Ramsey placed JonBenet on the floor, right where he stood in the front hallway. Arndt could see that the child's lips were blue. It was obvious that JonBenet was dead. Around her neck was a ligature with a small stick attached to one end. A similar ligature was around her right wrist. A circular red mark was visible at the base of her throat. On the palm of her left hand was a red ink drawing of a heart. The Boulder Police Department collected evidence from the crime scene. They collected the ligature from JonBenet's neck, a white nylon cord, and a broken paintbrush handle, and the ligature from her right wrist, and the black duct tape that was on her mouth, and the white long underwear bottoms that JonBenet was wearing. and they sent these items to the CBI for DNA testing. So number 1, the garrote, the white nylon cord. So the 2 areas of stain on the cord were cut out, and the CBI analyzed the cuttings for DNA, and the DNA from the 2 stains matched the victim's DNA. No foreign DNA was found. Item number 2, the paintbrush handle. No blood was indicated on the paintbrush handle. No fingerprints suitable for identification purposes was developed. No DNA was developed from this item. Number 3, the ligature from the wrists. No DNA was developed from this item because at the time they didn't do the touch DNA method where you scrape the item and collect the scrapings and test it for DNA. Item number 4 in this list, the black piece of duct tape. The tape removed from JonBenet's mouth tested positive for human blood. The blood was analyzed by the CBI. DNA from the blood matched the victim's DNA. Item 5 wasn't tested for DNA in 1997 by the CBI because they felt that John Ramsey touched the long underwear when he carried his daughter up to her bed, and when he touched her long underwear when he discovered her body in the basement and carried her upstairs. So the conclusion would be that the perpetrator wore gloves. This was not an assault on a live person, but was done to cover up a previous crime. And the crime scene was staged and exaggerated like a sex maniac came into the house and made this garrote and tied her wrists and put duct tape on her mouth, which none of this was done while she was alive. John Ramsey had been molesting his daughter for months, and at the White's house he had several glasses of wine. And after Patsy and Burke had gone to bed, he went and got in bed with JonBenet, and he injured her, and she bled, and she screamed, and then he hit her in the head with something solid. And Patsy found her husband John with JonBenet, and she couldn't find the courage to call the police on John. So John took JonBenet to the basement, and he made a garrote and strangled her, and then staged the crime scene by tying her wrists, putting duct tape on her mouth, and putting the scuff mark on the wall, and putting the suitcase under the window. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved, and next weekend we'll have a Zodiac killer case and something about those Dutch girls.